Do you know what's strange? Some people work 12-hour days. They lead teams. They take nonstop meetings and they carry enormous responsibility, but somehow they still seem calm. They seem clear-headed, focused, energized. But here's something scary. Many of these very same people are burning out and they don't even realize it. And the outcome is not that they're collapsing, but they're slowly, emotionally flatlining. It's happening internally. It's mentally, psychologically, and it happens so gradually that by the time they finally notice it, they can barely recognize themselves anymore. They become less patient, less creative. They become emotionally unavailable, less clear-headed, and eventually, because of all this, they become less alive internally, emotional flatline. When this happens, they have entered what I call the fade state. And the thing that makes this dangerous is that it's almost never happening suddenly. Honestly, it'd be easier to recognize if it did happen suddenly, but instead it develops very slowly, almost imperceptibly, which is exactly why burnout becomes so dangerous. Because eventually the emotional and the mental residue of burnout stops feeling just merely tiring and it starts to feel dangerous. Now, meanwhile, there are other people who can take weekends off. They can sleep 8 hours a night. They can go on vacations and still feel mentally cooked. Why? You see, most people think that rest means stopping work, but that's not exactly what restores you, because burnout is not caused by work alone. Burnout happens when your brain gets trapped in a cycle, in the same psychological and physiologic state for too long. Now, what I'm talking about is not just about being motivated. Researchers in occupational psychology now consider something called psychological detachment as one of the strongest predictors of burnout recovery. In a major review that was published in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, researchers found that people who could mentally disengage from work had significantly lower emotional exhaustion. They had better sleep and better long-term recovery outcomes than people who remain psychologically on after work. In other words, the nervous system must actually exit the stress state in order for it to recover. And that means the real solution is not simply doing less. It's something far more powerful. It's state shifting. Think about this. Your body changes locations all day long, but your nervous system never actually leaves stimulation. When stimulation becomes constant, your brain slowly loses the contrast between stimulation and recovery. And without contrast, your nervous system eventually stops knowing the difference between pressure and peace. Now, once you understand this, a lot of things suddenly start making sense. You realize why vacations often fail to fully restore people, because many people spent the entire first week of the 2-week vacation simply trying to transition out of the emotional and psychological residue from the previous work week. Their body left work, but their nervous system never actually did. You realize why sleep sometimes does not help. And suddenly you begin also to realize why weekends can disappear almost instantly and you've never fully recovered. And why some people technically rest, but they still feel mentally cooked afterwards. And why some of the very activities that we call rest quietly actually make burnout worse. Because if your nervous system never actually shifts states, then stimulation simply changes from stimulation at work to stimulation at rest. Work stress has become digital stimulation. Digital stimulation becomes emotional stimulation. Emotional stimulation becomes mental stimulation. And the cycle never truly breaks. Researchers studying chronic stress and burnout have now found measurable physiologic changes inside the nervous system itself. There was a large meta-analysis published in Psychiatry Investigation that found that burnout is associated with significantly reduced heart rate variability, which is one of the clearest biological signs that the nervous system is actually struggling to shift back into recovery mode. In simple terms, the body becomes less flexible at turning stress off, so the body is less capable of stopping the cycle. So in this video, I want to show you something different. I'm going to show you the specific kind of rest that actually interrupts burnout and removes the emotional residue that's attached to it. And I'm going to describe why most recovery methods quietly fail people that are high performers, and demonstrate ways in which executives and leaders unknowingly destroy their recovery capacity. And I'll tell you about a simple 5-minute reset system that you can use between meetings, between blocks of work, between parenting episodes, between the areas of stress and major trauma life transitions in your life. Because the real goal is not to escape work. In fact, the goal is to become someone that burnout can no longer reach. And honestly, and here's the weirdest part, people who are the best at recovery are usually not the people resting the most. They're the people who know how to shift states the fastest. A few years ago, a leader in business was asked a strange question during an interview. How do you avoid burnout working at this level? His answer completely caught people off guard. He said, I never stay psychologically in the same room for too long. Now, at first, this sounds vague, almost poetic, but by the end of the video, that single sentence may completely change the way you think about recovery forever. This business leader learned by experience because over time, something had started happening to him every single evening about 4:30 p.m. And it didn't happen physically, but it happened mentally and emotionally. He said that he would walk into late-day meetings carrying the psychological residue of every interaction that had occurred earlier that same day. And by the evening, he no longer felt like the same person that he had been at 10 a.m. He was reactive. He felt impatient. He recognized he was less strategic. And the mental residue from the earlier meetings kept stacking up silently in the background until the tiny problems that he would face in that late afternoon meeting suddenly felt enormous. Minor emails started feeling personal. Simple decisions became mentally overwhelming. People talking too long became, frankly, irritating. Small interruptions, unexpected schedule changes, minor inconveniences, things that once felt manageable started feeling physically exhausting. Eventually, he recognized the transition. He began to wonder about something that was terrifying to him. Was he losing his intelligence, his ability, his relevance? Was he losing his edge? But he wasn't losing his intelligence. And he wasn't really losing his edge permanently. He was just burning out. And he was losing the ability to recover efficiently. Researchers at the University of Minnesota discovered something called attention residue. In that study, when people switched from one task to another without mentally disengaging first, part of their attention remained stuck in the previous task, and their performance on the task that was next measurably declined. The researchers concluded that unresolved mental carryover literally reduced cognitive performance, which might make somebody question if they were losing their intelligence or their edge if all they had was continual meetings and interactions and stress that went on from moment to moment throughout the day. So psychological carryover is not imaginary. It's actually measurable, and it does affect performance. So this business person could no longer shake the mental and emotional residue of the earlier parts of the day. And honestly, for a lot of people watching this, that probably sounds painfully familiar. And this is why most people completely misunderstand burnout. They think that burnout looks like a person who is collapsing. But most burnout does not look like collapse. The truth is, the thing that makes burnout dangerous is that it quietly affects your ability to think and process long before people break down on the outside. A major systematic review found that burnout was consistently associated with measurable impairment in multiple areas of mental processing. These areas included attention, working memory, decision-making, executive function, and cognitive flexibility. This means that people can still appear highly functional on the outside, while their mental sharpness is already deteriorating internally. So you see, most people who are suffering burnout look functional. You'll still answer emails. You'll still show up because externally your life still looks successful. So nobody notices your nervous system is quietly deteriorating. Nobody notices, including you, so you can't fix it. Do you see the hidden danger here? Because internally, your nervous system never actually exits engagement mode. Your brain slowly loses its contrast. And without contrast, your nervous system eventually stops knowing the difference between pressure and peace. And that distinction changes everything. Because if your brain never truly changes states, it never truly recovers. Think about your average day for a second. You wake up and you immediately check your phone. Then there's meetings, then there's emails, then there's text, and you have decisions to make. And then there's traffic, and then there's dinner, and then there's Netflix, and then there's scrolling, and then sleep. Notice something? Your body changed locations all day long. but your nervous system never actually leaves stimulation. It never got a chance to shut down or alter changing states. And that's why so many people say things like, I rested all weekend, but I still feel exhausted. Because inactivity is not the same thing as recovery. If stimulation remains constant, your brain still believes it's working. One of the foundational models in stress physiology is called the cognitive activation theories of stress. Researchers found that the brain and the nervous system does not respond only to physical workload. It responds to the perceived ongoing demand, mental or physical, which means unresolved anticipation, notifications that keep replaying, mental replay of circumstances. Emotional carryover can keep the stress hormones elevated long after work technically stops. In other words, your body can still be resting while your nervous system believes the threat is still active. And there's the reason why some people could come back from a 10-day vacation and still feel drained within 48 hours. And there are other people, they can recover deeply in 5 minutes between meetings. But the difference is not time. It's whether they successfully shifted states. And once you see this, you start noticing it everywhere. For example, have you ever gone for a walk and suddenly you solved a problem that felt impossible just an hour earlier? Or had your best idea in the shower? Or felt mentally lighter after just driving in silence for 15 minutes? These are not random acts. Your brain has finally escaped constant mental activity, cognitive continuity, constant cognitive load. Researchers at Stanford University actually tested this. In one study involving 176 participants doing creative thinking while walking or sitting. Creative thinking while walking increased their creative thinking by an average of roughly 60% compared to thinking while sitting continuously. Some participants nearly doubled their creative output while they were walking, which means that movement does not just help the body recover, it changes the way the brain processes information. When you took a 5-minute walk or changed the physical location or surroundings for a moment, you actually shifted states. And honestly, and here's the scary part, modern life is almost perfectly designed to prevent you from shifting states consistently. Because technology has erased transitions. We sit and we multitask all day. We stare intensely at some workstation. And while working on projects, answering phones, checking messages, we do it all from one seated position. Neuroscience research now shows that constant digital multitasking of one everyday work environment actually changes the structure of attention itself. Again, researchers at Stanford University found that heavy multitaskers perform significantly worse on attention control tasks or filtering irrelevant information than the light multitaskers, which means the brain literally becomes worse at mentally filtering noise when overstimulation becomes constant. Transitions used to be where humans were able to recover. Think about older generations for a second. Driving home from work was the transition. Walking home was the decompression. Silence existed naturally. For thousands of years, human beings had built-in psychologic and physiologic recovery systems. Walking, silence, manual tasks, just being still, even boredom. But now, most people have not experienced true mental silence in years. Because the second one stimulus ends, we immediately load up another one. We load up podcasts and notifications and emails and videos and music and text and content and more input and more input. We wonder why we're stressed. Your brain stays at Mach 10 all day long and never gets a chance to land. And eventually, your nervous system starts treating normal life like a continual emergency. Researchers now know that chronic psychological stress does not just stay emotional. Long-term mental burnout has been associated with measurable physiologic changes in the body involving cortisol regulation and hormones, inflammatory signaling, autonomic balance between the autonomic nervous system of the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. It actually changes the sleep architecture at night when you're trying to rest. This all means that prolonged activation eventually becomes biologically embedded in the body itself. You become used to it, and that is when burnout starts to feel permanent. And it's not because you worked too hard, it's because you never stopped psychologically being on. And here's the craziest part. The highest performers in the world often understand this instinctively, not because they're lazy, trying to check out of things, but because they understand that recovery is a performance skill. In fact, researchers studying long-term performance found that recovery experiences strongly predict a better work engagement, more emotional stability, and increased resilience over time. In fact, the strongest predictors included psychological detachment, the ability to relax, mastery experiences, and a sense of control during the off hours. This means that sustainable high performance is not built only on stress tolerance, it's actually built on recovery ability. It's a talent. And this is why elite athletes don't just obsess over training hard, they obsess over recovery. They obsess over these transitional rituals. The exact same principle applies mentally as well. People who avoid burnout are not necessarily working less, they're simply better at exiting one psychological state before entering another one. And in that next section, I'm going to show you the exact 5-minute state shift protocol that makes this work in real life. Even if your schedule is chaotic, even if you have constant busyness, even if your brain feels permanently overloaded, this can work for you. So, what does an actual state shift look like? I do not want to provide you just theory. And I'm not going to give you some meditate on the mountain advice. I want you to see something that's real, something that's practical, and something that you can actually do on a Tuesday afternoon between Zoom calls. So here's a mistake that most people make. They try to recover by adding relaxation instead of removing continuity. Those are not the same thing. Your brain does not recover simply because you stopped working. Your brain recovers when you stopped being the same version of yourself continuously. Think about that for a second. Most people are carrying the emotional load of their 8 a.m. stress all the way into the midnight hours. And this is what modern nervous systems are doing now. And honestly, this is the real problem with burnout. And this is why so many ambitious people secretly fail at resting, because they bring the same mental state into everything. Everything's always intense. It's always in high gear. It's always Mach 10. Multitasking. They answer the emails while they watch Netflix. They think about work during dinner time. They scroll during conversations. They take stress into their sleep habits. Physically, yeah, they stopped working. They're resting, right? But neurologically, they never left work. I once heard a business leader describe burnout in the most accurate way I've ever heard. He said, I felt like psychological carryover just kept building throughout the day. And eventually, it felt like my brain forgot how to change gears. That's it. That's what chronic burnout actually feels like. Your nervous system is trapped in one gear all day, every day. And eventually, even tiny tasks start to feel heavy. Not because the tasks became harder, but because your nervous system never reset between them. And if this pattern continues long enough, people eventually stop feeling like they are themselves completely. And not because they're weak in character. That's not the issue. But because of chronic activation slowly changes how they think. Chronic activation slowly changes how they feel, how they respond, how much joy they experience. And eventually, what feels normal. All of that's changed by chronic activation. And what is the thing that makes this dangerous because of all this? Well, here it is. Some people drop out of their careers, or they change jobs because of this. And truthfully, they did not lose their career first. The first thing they lost was their emotional range. Their ambition survived, but their humanity quietly starts to shrink. And when they dropped out of their careers or they changed their jobs, things did not get better because they took the problem with them. And honestly, and you may have already experienced this without realizing it, you finally sit down at night, the day is over, everything is done. And instead of feeling relaxed, you feel restless, irritable, kind of like mental buzzing. Your body feels exhausted, but you feel like you need energy. Your nervous system refuses to power down. Researchers studying work-related rumination found that repeatedly mentally replaying the work stresses strongly predicts chronic fatigue and poor sleep quality. We're talking a mental issue of poor sleep quality. We're also talking a physical outcome of chronic fatigue syndrome. In one study that was published in the Journal of Occupational Health and Psychology, rumination explained nearly 10% of all the unique variants in chronic fatigue all by itself, just ruminating on what happened before. Meaning sometimes exhaustion is not caused by the workload, it's caused by the unresolved psychological carryover or the residue from the earlier part of the day. Do you recognize this? Can you see it happening in your own life? Can you see how deeply burnout and emotional depletion are connected? So here's a solution: the 5-minute state shift protocol. And it works because it forces your brain to recognize this moment is different from that moment. That's the key. It's not rest, it's just difference. So here's how it works. I call it the shift and silence method. First step, physical interruption. You need movement. Not because movement magically cures burnout, but because biology and physiology change psychology faster than thinking changes psychology. So stand up, walk outside. Even brief exposure to natural environments appears to rapidly change stress physiology. There was a large meta-analysis that was published in the Environmental Research Bulletin, and it found that exposure to green space, for instance, was associated with lower cortisol levels, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, and reduced sympathetic nervous system activation, all parts demonstrating decreased stress. And this meant environmental transitions can physically help shift the nervous system into a recovery mode. Once you move and you're outside, stretch. If you can't go outside, just change rooms. If you can't change rooms, wash your face with some cold water. Do something physical that signals to your nervous system that the previous state is over. Because this is why sitting in the exact same chair, trying to relax, often fails. Your brain still associates that environment with pressure and stress. So, move. Step 2, input reduction. Now, this is where most people accidentally sabotage their recovery. They scroll. They check their podcast. They look at their email. No scrolling, no podcasts, no stimulation stacking. Your brain needs at least a few minutes where nothing is demanding things from it. And that silence, that's not empty. It is recovery space. Because most people are deeply uncomfortable with it. Because they forgot what an unstimulated mind actually feels like. If silence feels uncomfortable to you, that does not mean you are failing at recovery. It does not mean that you're doing it wrong. It means your nervous system is becoming profoundly overstimulated. And here's where it gets interesting. The goal of recovery is not to become less ambitious. In fact, people who master the ability to interrupt their state and create silence often become more effective because they stop accumulating stress from the previous meetings and leaking energy between their tasks. Think about 2 executives. One carries the emotional residue of every single stressful meeting directly into the next one. The other one successfully resets between meetings. Now, at 5 p.m., who makes better decisions? Who has more emotional control? Who communicates more clearly? Who burns out slower? That difference adds up and compounds quietly for years, like psychological compounding interest. And so honestly, this explains something that many people quietly feel ashamed about. They feel ashamed that they cannot, quote, handle life the way they used to. It's not some kind of weakness or character flaw. It's accumulation without interruption. You were never designed to psychologically be activated for 14 hours straight. Nobody was. But modern life hides this from us because constant stimulation now feels normal. Burnout researchers describe something they call the recovery paradox. The more chronically stressed people become, the more recovery they need, while simultaneously, they become worse at recovering effectively. Chronic stress impairs our ability to emotionally detach, to relax. The nervous system is impeded from recovering itself. This means that burnout eventually damages the very systems that are needed to escape burnout. So meanwhile, your nervous system is keeping score. For every unresolved state that stacks up, it's going to come back and haunt you with compounded interest until eventually your brain starts protecting itself by shutting down. And it will shut down motivation. It will shut down focus. It will shut down patience. It will shut down emotional capacity. That's burnout. It's not laziness. It's not failure. It's just accumulated nervous system activation without change or recovery. And once you understand this, you start to realize something that's very profound. The best recovery moments in life are usually tiny. Modern recovery science strongly supports this idea. One large meta-analysis involving more than 2,300 participants found that even a very short micro break significantly reduced fatigue and improved mental energy. The effect sizes for improving vigor and reducing exhaustion were both statistically significant, even when the breaks lasted under 10 minutes. Sometimes your nervous system does not need a vacation. Sometimes it simply needs interruption and contrast. We're not talking about something dramatic. We're talking just a quick walk before entering the house. 3 minutes of sitting in silence before a meeting. A transition ritual of something that happens before dinner. 5 deep breaths before opening another app. Now, these slow breathing techniques, they actually work very quickly. Studies on autonomic regulation show that controlled breathing can measurably improve your vagal tone, which affects your heart rate variability, within minutes. And both vagal tone and heart rate variability are associated with improved nervous system recovery and emotional regulation. This means very small physiologic interventions can rapidly alter the mental state. And these moments might seem insignificant until you realize that they're interrupting psychological carryover. And psychological carryover is what slowly cooks people alive. And that's why high performers who stay mentally sharp for decades rarely rely on motivation alone. Instead, they're actually unknowingly building what I call recovery architecture. These are small little systems, tiny transitions, intentional interruptions that were all designed to protect the nervous system from continual overload. And here's something that almost nobody talks about. The people who stay mentally sharp for decades usually do not have stronger willpower. What they have is better recovery architecture, meaning that intentionally they are building small systems that protect their nervous system from continuous overload. They're not lazy. They're not smarter than everybody else. And the strange part, most of the time, they don't even realize they're doing it. Think about the modern high school. It's filled with students who struggle to keep their attention focused, right? But also, they have too much restless energy. And yet, schools have accidentally maybe stumbled upon something very brilliant. The longest that most students expect to stay in one psychological environment is usually about 50 minutes. Well, then what happens? They stand up, they move, they walk, they change classrooms, they change teachers, they change subjects, they change stimulation. For roughly 10 minutes every hour, their brain and their nervous system physically shift states. Now, imagine telling a 10th grader, you must sit in one room, focus on one subject without interruption for 8 straight hours every day. That would be a recipe for disaster. Their attention would collapse, their mental acuity would drop, their retention would fall apart, behavior would deteriorate without even fully realizing it. School systems have built into themselves something that the nervous system actually naturally needed: regular state shifting. And here's the most ironic part. We did this as children, but as adults, we have slowly disciplined ourselves out of the very patterns that once helped us to learn, to focus, recovery, and stay emotionally alive. We stopped transitioning. We stopped resetting. We stopped interrupting stress. Instead, we psychologically drag one state directly into the next. We drag meetings into emails, emails into phone calls into traffic into family, family into late night scrolling, scrolling into sleep. There is no contrast, there is no reset, there is no recovery, and slowly and almost imperceptibly, we begin to feel what I call the fade state, the place where people remain physically functional, but emotionally, like I said before, flatlined. The dangerous part of this is that most people don't notice it's happening because the mental and emotional residue keeps quietly accumulating through the day. But the people who sustain high performance the longest eventually figure this out. They intentionally build systems to protect their nervous system from continuous overload. So some people take the same walk every evening before they enter the house. They sit in the same silence for 2 minutes before every meeting. They constantly change environments throughout the day. Some never allow workspaces to become rest spaces and rest spaces to become workspaces. They don't allow them to overlap. There are people that protect their mornings. Some actually just protect their transitions. Many protect their sleep. But underneath all of these things is the same principle. They do not allow psychologically intense or stressful states to bleed endlessly into each other. And honestly, this may be one of the biggest hidden differences between people who sustain high performance for decades and the people who slowly burn themselves down without even realizing it. It is a powerful change in perspective when we realize that burnout is rarely caused by one catastrophic moment. Most of the time, burnout is an invisible accumulation. Tiny stressors, tiny carryovers, tiny unresolved nervous system activation again and again, until eventually your system reaches the breaking point and quietly says, I cannot keep doing this without recovery. And this is when people enter the phase state. And this is when we get emotional brownout. The place where you've lost so much internal energy that all you can do is veg at the end of the day. There's no emotional margin left, no mental bandwidth left. And the people at work that needed your input all day long, and now the people at home that want your presence because evenings belong to them, don't have you because you have none to give. I'm certain you genuinely try, but internally, by the mid-afternoon of the workday, standing with those who rely on your expertise and direction, they don't have it. And by the late afternoon at home with those you love, who look to you for the responsibilities you carry there, you don't have it. And by the evening, when self-improvement and self-discipline are supposed to happen, you just don't have it. You don't have anything left to give. And what makes this even more dangerous is the fact that modern culture often rewards this pattern. You're constantly reachable. You're constantly busy. You're constantly overstimulated. But there's a hidden cost to living without guardrails and without transitions here. Your brain slowly loses that contrast, and without contrast, recovery stops happening. And this is why state shifting matters so much, because state shifting restores contrast. Suddenly, work just becomes work. Rest becomes rest. Thinking becomes thinking, and silence can stay silence. Your nervous system can finally tell the difference again. You remember the business leader we talked about earlier, the one who said, "I never stay psychologically in the same room too long"? What he eventually explained was fascinating. Before every major meeting, he had a ritual. It was nothing dramatic. It's nothing related to biohacking or some expensive routine. He would simply sit alone for 3 minutes with actually absolutely zero input before entering another room. He didn't have any phone. He didn't have any music. He didn't have any emails. He just let his brain mentally reset to another environment. And he said those 3 minutes completely changed the quality of every decision he made afterwards. And it's not because they made him smarter, but because those 3 minutes prevented the mental residue from following him throughout the day. He stopped it at the end of every meeting. And honestly, that is the real danger that most people never noticed. Not exhaustion itself, it's the residue, the emotional residue, the mental cognitive residue, the stress residue. The human brain was never designed to carry uninterrupted psychological momentum all day long. Once you understand this, you'll stop asking, how do I escape burnout? And you'll start asking a better question. How often does my nervous system actually recover? And that's the question that changes everything. Because recovery is not something that you wait for till the end of the week. It is something that you intentionally create throughout the day. Small moments, little transitions, micro interruptions, small resets. And ironically, those tiny resets, they're often the very thing that allows people to carry on massive responsibility without collapsing. So most people think that burnout happens because life became too heavy. But often, burnout happens because the mind never gets permission to set the weight down. Not for 5 minutes, not for one evening, not even during sleep. And eventually, your nervous system stops asking for recovery gently, and it starts demanding it. And when that happens, people do not always fall apart dramatically. Sometimes they just enter that fade state, and emotionally they are flatlined. One of the lesser-known characteristics of burnout is emotional blunting. Researchers studying emotional exhaustion found that chronic stress exposure gradually reduced emotional responsiveness, emotional energy, and emotional flexibility over time. Meaning many people in burnout are simply not tired. They are emotionally depleted at nervous systems level. They are emotionally flatlined. So if you have been resting, but you still feel exhausted, maybe the issue is not that you've needed more time off. Maybe you were simply never taught the kind of rest that actually changes your state, the kind that interrupts the accumulation of mental residue, the kind that restores contrast, the kind that teaches your nervous system how to finally leave survival mode. Because the goal is not to stop working. The goal is to stop carrying every moment into the next one so that your brain can finally experience contrast again. Because without contrast, your nervous system eventually stops knowing the difference between pressure and peace. And the people who learn that skill, they become difficult to burn out. So if you want some deeper training on how to build those systems that protect your energy, your attention, your emotional capacity, and your long-term mental performance, check the description and the pinned comments below. I've linked additional resources, tools, deeper trainings that were designed to help you to build real recovery architecture into everyday life. And the people who learn that skill, they become incredibly difficult to burn out. So if you want deeper training on how to build some systems that will protect your energy, help your attention to be better focused, and improve your emotional capacity and your long-term mental performance. Check out the description below and the pinned comments that are in that description.